Hey friends, it's Tomer, and in this video we're going to be checking out the brand new Commander pre-constructed deck Blame Game, coming with Murders at Karlov Manor. This is one of the 4 brand new Commander pre-constructed decks that were previewed yesterday, and each of the decks, including this one, comes with 11 exclusive cards that are exclusive to that deck, along with one more card, Ransom Note, that is exclusive to the set, and each of the decks come with an exclusive art of that card. So we're going to check out the full deck list, starting with the 11 brand new cards in the deck, and then we're going to check out the most expensive reprints and all the other reprints, and then I'm going to give my final thoughts on the entire Precon as a whole, if it's worth the money to buy. But before we begin, you can pre-order these sweet new Precons over at our sponsor, cardking.com/mtggoldfish. So we kick things off with the face commander, Nelly Borka, which kind of tells you what this deck is all about. This is a Boros Goad deck, but more specifically, it's all about just having our opponents attack each other, dealing a lot of damage for our own behalf, and then we can sweep up the remaining stragglers at the end. So Nelly Borka, Impulsive Accuser, is a 4-mana Boros 2/4 legendary creature human detective. It has vigilance, and whenever it attacks, suspect target creature. This is a new mechanic that says a suspected creature has menace and can't block, and then you goad all suspected creatures. And whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls deals combat damage to one or more of your opponents, you and the controller of those creatures each draw a card. So Nelly is a really nice goad commander. She's a really nice mix of forcing your opponents to attack each other by suspecting target creatures and goading them so they're forced to attack each other, and then also kind of indirectly encouraging them to attack each other, kind of like an Edric effect, where you encourage them to hit each other by letting them draw cards, and then you draw cards in the process too. And that like sort of soft incentive to get people to hit each other kind of works really well in terms of table politics, because if you're not establishing a goad, or if you don't have any pillow fort to deter people from attacking you, just having Nelly's second ability, enticing people with card draw, is going to be usually enough for people to at least hit each other, lowering everybody else's life total and keeping yours a little bit higher. And you're also going to be drawing cards in the process too, so you're also benefiting more out of this exchange. So I really like this mix of forced combat and highly encouraged combat. Both ways you're going to be reaping a lot of the benefits, and also it's not going to feel too bad for your opponents, because at the very least they're going to be drawing cards as well. So if I was upgrading Nelly, the certain cards that I would be looking out for are cards like Smuggler's Share, which is actually in the Precon itself. Being able to enable people to draw extra cards when they're hitting each other is a great incentive to make sure that everybody else is getting hit except for you, but you can benefit even more so with white cards like Smuggler's Share, which say when your opponents draw their second card, you get to draw another card. So not only are you drawing a card when your opponents are hitting each other, but then you get to draw another card because your opponents drew an extra card off of you. So that's fantastic here. But then if we're going to be adding cards to the Precon, Agris Cost, Spirit of Justice, another great one. It allows you to suspect more and more opposing creatures, and then those suspected creatures get goaded, and then, you know, if you want to start taking out some problematic creatures, you can start exiling them as well too. Nelly is also an attack trigger, and it's a really good attack trigger. The only problem is that she's a 2/4 with vigilance, no such evasion, and she's pretty small in terms of a creature, so she's going to need assistance to actually attack without dying in the process. So cards like Whisper Cloak not only protect her from targeted removal, but also allow her to attack unimpeded and get that attack trigger going. The next new card is another potential commander for the Precon, though I wouldn't recommend putting it as the face commander. This is Feather Radiant Arbiter. So this is a new version of Feather. It's 3 mana, 4/3 legendary creature angel, flying lifelink, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell that targets only Feather, you may choose any number of other creatures that spell could target and pay 2 for each of those creatures. If you do, for each of those creatures, copy that spell. The copy targets that creature. Copies of permanent spells become tokens. So this Feather is basically a nerfed Zada, and frankly also like a nerfed version of the original Feather the Redeemed, which all of these creatures, they have the gimmick of if you target just that creature, you can copy that target for other creatures. In the case of Zada, you get to target all your other creatures with that spell, and it really enables like a sort of combo Stormy style deck. or in the case of Feather, you get to repeatedly reuse that card, and that lends itself to a very grindy Voltron style play where you're constantly reusing removal spells and protection spells and just basically never running out of cards and just reusing the cards over and over again until eventually your opponents lose just to the sheer amount of card advantage. I think Feather is a nerfed version of both of those things, and I think that's actually a good thing. Like, I play Zada a good deal amount of times on Magic Online, and I've played it on Commander class, and I've noticed that like it's not a deck that I could actually whip out at a casual table very often. It's an all or nothing Storm deck, so like I kind of feel bad if I'm bringing it out to like random game night. And Feather also comes with a little bit of a stigma too, where it's kind of miserable to play against, to be honest, where unlike Zana, where you just immediately die after like a 10-minute turn, Feather is going to take a 10-minute turn every single turn for the rest of the game, and the game's going to go very, very long, and you're just going to be grinded out, and it's going to be very boring usually. So both those options, honestly, I'm not a big fan personally. I know there's a big, I'm a big Zada fan, but I feel a little bit bad about playing it, and I know there's a lot of Feather players who also kind of feel bad about playing it. So if you want like a nerf version of this that is more chill, I think Feather Radiant Arbiter is that option, though you could go the no chill option and go like Enchantress auras and load up on like Darksteel mutations and stuff like that, where you're basically shutting down your opponent's creatures. You're shutting down Feather too, but you just keep, you know, just casting auras, maybe bargaining them off, you know, sacrificing your auras while the token copies on your opponent's creatures remains. So you can do it like that. You can go like Feather Aura Prison style deck if you're mean. I guess that's just like the common thread here with Feathers. They're just mean. They look really pretty though. Yeah, but that's Feather in a nutshell. Moving on, we have Otherworldly Escort, which I believe is like an anime reference, like Yu Yu Hakusho. I don't know. I'd have to ask Krim. This is a 4-mana white 4/3 creature human detective. It has flash, and when it dies, if it's not a spirit, return to the battlefield under its owner's control with 4 charge counters on it. It's a spirit detective, and it's no longer a human. And then you can also pay 2 mana and tap it, remove a charge counter from Otherworldly Escort, destroy target creature that dealt damage to you this turn. So this is kind of like a rattlesnake for the deck, and it works very well in this precon because this deck is all about like just forcing your opponents, not forcing, but heavily encouraging your opponents and / forcing them to attack each other. So you're doing that with a mix of Goad effects, you're doing that with a mix of Pillow Forts where it's almost impossible to attack you, and then you're doing it with effects like this. This is what I would call a rattlesnake, where you can be attacked, your opponents can choose to attack you, but then they're going to be punished for it, so it's like a big disincentive to do so. So you can flash into Otherworldly Escort, maybe you can trade or chump block like a would-be attacker, and then when it dies, it turns into a super-powered rattlesnake where, yeah, you can get hit, but then that creature is probably going to die immediately afterwards. So I like it. It's a really nice rattlesnake, and it makes a lot of sense in the precon. Playing it outside of the precon, I would think you could add more charge counters onto it with stuff like Grateful Apparition, but honestly, 4 charge counters, that's 4 activations. I think that's more than enough. At some point, this thing is just going to die to a board wipe or whatever. So I think you don't really need to go proliferate, but you could do like some weird stuff like forcing your opponents to attack you. Honestly, like having the initiative or having the monarchy is more than enough incentive for opponents to try and attack you. So Otherworldly Escort can like protect your monarchy, can protect your initiative, but you could do like some cutesy things like Trove of Temptation forces your opponents to attack into you, and then you're forced to kill them. Well, not forced to, but you will kill them afterwards. And also it does turn into a spirit, so you could put it in like a spirit deck, and that's pretty cool as well too. So like it could go into Millicent. And then we've got Havoc Eater. This is a new 7-mana mono red creature elemental. It's a 3/3 flyer, but it gets much bigger when it enters the battlefield. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, goad up to 1 target creature that opponent controls. Put X+1/+1 counters on Havoc Eater, where X is the total power of creatures goaded this way. So ETB, goad, if you have 3 opponents, each of them with at least 1 creature on the battlefield, ETB, goad 3 creatures is a pretty good rate. And then, you know, if they're just like 3 to 5 power, well, this thing is going to be be at least a 10/10, maybe even more, and it has evasion. So that's pretty decent for a 7 drop. And also it's on a creature, so you can do like reanimation shenanigans. Obviously, it's very good in a Goad deck, and it gets even better if you have any ways of reusing that ETB trigger more efficiently with blink and reanimation or whatever. So things I expect to do with Havoc Eater, obviously it's really good in the Precon, but if you're putting it in other decks, Cardor Doomscourge is a Goad deck. It's my personal favorite version of Goad. It doesn't specifically say Goad, it's like a supercharged version of Goad. Or you could go Karazakar, that's also a very popular one that literally focuses on goading and rewards you for goading as well on the card. And then Horde of Notions, this is an elemental and it's a very expensive one. So I think the best ways of using it are either like reanimation, which, you know, in black decks like Cardor you can easily do, but also Horde of Notions. Instead of paying 7, you could pay like 5 and put it directly onto the battlefield from your graveyard. That's pretty sweet too. Next up we have Immortal Obligation, and I think this might be my favorite card from the deck. Actually no, this is my second favorite card of the deck. This is a 2-mana instant, and it says return target creature card from an opponent's graveyard to the battlefield under their control with a duty counter on it. For as long as that creature has a duty counter on it, it is goaded, can't attack you or a permanent you control, and can't block creatures you control. So this is a really sweet politics card. It's an instant speed reanimation for 2 mana, which is just a fantastic raid, but you have to target one of your opponent's creatures. However, because it's instant speed, you could do like silly things, like if an opponent is being attacked by another opponent, you can be like, hey, defending player, I can reanimate a blocker for you, and then they could trade, or the other creature dies or whatever. That's pretty sweet. Or you just like reanimate like the biggest beater in somebody's graveyard, and they're just going to be goaded for the rest of the game, so they're just going to be destroying your opponents for you. That's amazing too. Or you could just curry a favor somehow. You could be like, hey, if I reanimate your creature, can you help me out in some other way too? Trade some resources a little bit. So this card, really great politics, really great shenanigans. I love the card, and it's especially good in a Goad deck, obviously. Next, we have Mob Verdict. This is a 4-mana red sorcery with Secret Council. Each player secretly votes for another player, then these votes are revealed. For each vote an opponent received, Mob Verdict deals 2 damage to that player and each creature that player controls, and then for each vote you received, draw a card. So in a 4-player game, if everybody voted for the same player, they would take 8 damage, and each of their creatures would take 8 damage. More realistically though, if there's like an arch enemy at the table, like 3 of you are going to be voting for one person, so they're going to take 6 and their creatures are going to take 6, and then somebody else is going to take 2 and their creatures are going to take 2, or they're going to choose you instead and you get to draw a card instead. I think this is a kind of like silly of a board wipe, but it could be pretty decent. It really depends on the deck. I don't think it's particularly very good in this deck, but I see potential in like burn decks. Torolf, God of Fury, Agar, the Freezing Flame, Solfin, Mayhem Dominus. All of these are burn commanders, and almost always they're going to be running ways of doubling, tripling the amount of burn damage you're dealing. So if you're running stuff like Fiery Emancipation or Solfim or whatever, this like 6 damage is going to turn into 12 damage and is going to be some serious heat. And for 4 mana, it's actually a pretty decent rate to start building upon. So I think it's actually a really good card for burn decks, just not here. Next, we have Take the Bait. This is a 4-mana Boros instant that says cast a spell only during an opponent's turn and only during combat. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn. Untap all attacking creatures and goad them. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So this is like a super fog. Instead of paying like 1 mana for a fog, prevent all damage, you're paying 4 mana and you're giving your opponent an extra turn to deal damage basically on your behalf, right? Like if it would be sent to you, you get to blank that damage, and then you get to send all that damage to somebody else. Maybe they'll die to blockers, maybe they'll just deal a lot of damage to a mutual enemy of yours. Either way, you're going to be benefiting from it. And another cool thing about this card is that you can cast this after damage is actually dealt while still in the combat phase. So if an opponent is attacking one of your mutual enemies, you can have them just deal that damage, and then afterwards you cast Take the Bait still in the combat phase and make them have an extra combat and attack again, and as long they can't attack you, and it's great. So it could deal double damage to your opponents, which is kind of neat. So cards that are similar to this is basically like a color shifted Illusionist Gambit. I think the Gambit is just a little bit worse, but it's effectively the same thing. I like the Gambit in certain decks. 4 mana is a lot to hold up though at instant speed. That's the main annoyance of it. And I'm not entirely certain that it's always going to be worth it compared to other options. Like for example, if I wanted like a mass Goad effect that like made sure that I wasn't going to be taking damage this turn, I'd much prefer Taunt from the Rampart. It costs 1 more mana and it's a sorcery, but it goes to all your opponent's creatures and they can't block until your next turn too. So not only do you get a free attack in there, but also your opponents get to attack each other and they'll do maximum damage to each other because nobody can block. So I really like Taunt from the Rampart over Take the Bait, but there are certain times where Take the Bait's better. For example, if you're running Sunforger, then you can actually tutor out Take the Bait in a Sunforger package, very cool. So it's a neat super fog. It's going to lead to certain blowouts and it's going to lead to really cool memories, so I think the card is really cool. I just don't think it's particularly like super strong or anything. Next, we have Prisoner's Dilemma. This is a 5 mana red sorcery, and it basically tells you what the Prisoner's Dilemma is by showing you a scenario. Each opponent secretly chooses Silence or Snitch, then the choices are revealed. If each opponent chose Silence, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 4 damage to each of them. If each opponent chose Snitch, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 8 damage to each of them. Otherwise, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 12 damage to each opponent who chose Silence. So if everybody chooses Silence, if everybody agrees they're only going to take 4 damage together, then okay, everybody chooses Silence, they all take 4 damage. However, if everybody decides to Snitch, they're hoping to, you know, not take the damage, then everybody takes 8. However, if somebody says, I choose Silence, and then anybody else chooses Snitch, then the people who chose Snitch, they don't take any damage, but the people who chose Silence, they take 12 damage. So it's a really cool, like, political, sneaky thing that just causes chaos at the table, and I love it. And it has flashback of 7. So what do I expect Prisoner's Dilemma to do? I think it's basically like a more fun version of the most classic, most played emblematic Prisoner's Dilemma in Commander, which is Rhystic Study, which is like Prisoner's Dilemma, except everybody's sad except for the person who cast it, I guess. And I think Prisoner's Dilemma, just like the other burn spell we looked at earlier, is going to work really well in burn decks like Soulfim and stuff. Instead of dealing, you know, like 4 damage to each opponent, you're going to take a minimum of 8 damage. And, you know, if people are playing the politics game, maybe some people are going to take 24 damage instead. So it's going to be really interesting how people actually deal with Prisoner's Dilemma. I don't think it's like a particularly powerful card or anything. It's very good in burn decks, and I would maybe just throw it into other decks as well too. But it's a very fun card. Like, I think it's going to lead to really fun dynamics where, you know, if you're at low life, can you afford to stay silent? Are you going to try and Snitch? Is everybody going to try and Snitch? Like, who knows? I assume most of the time, most people are everybody's going to be taking the 8. But then when you add like burn multipliers like Soulfim, it's going to get even deadlier. It's going to get super fun. Next up, we have Hot Pursuit. This is a 2 mana red enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, suspect target creature an opponent controls. As long as Hot Pursuit remains on the battlefield, that creature is also goaded. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if 2 or more players have lost the game, gain control of all goaded and or suspected creatures until end of turn, untap them, they gain haste until end of turn. So Hot Pursuit actually provides the Goad deck one key flaw, like it kind of addresses one key flaw of the Goad deck where goading doesn't do anything once it's 1v1. Once your opponent doesn't have any other opponent that they can attack other than you, they're just allowed to attack you. So if you're a full out Goad deck and you've successfully eliminated 2 of your 3 opponents and it's now a one-on-one, your go-to cards just don't work anymore. And Hot Pursuit actually makes them still work. You know, you get to control your opponent's creatures on your turn and then basically swing for lethal and finish the job. So Hot Pursuit is a 2 mana finisher for the Go deck, but it also works early on too. And that makes it possibly the best card for a dedicated Go deck, honestly. It comes out early, it's effective early, and then late game, it becomes your finisher too. So what more can you expect for a 2-drop? I expect it being very, very good in the precon, but again, any Goad commander is going to absolutely love it. So Karazakar, Goads, Furcrack Goads, Baloth Goads, any deck that specifically Goads, not so much Cardor, honestly, because it doesn't Goad, but like any of the Goad commanders, this is going to be great. Then we come to another aura. This is Redemption Arc. It's a 3-mana white enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature has indestructible and is goaded, and you can pay 2 mana, 1 and a white, and exile enchanted creature. So Redemption Arc is like an impetus, like a vow, where it goads the creature, it buffs them, it makes them indestructible, which is like a serious buff, one of the best ones you could give them. But if the threat ever becomes too big, or you need to eliminate your ally, you just exile it. So I think this card is really sweet, really political. Like you could throw this onto your opponent's best creature, and you know, it's gonna be attacking, it's gonna be dealing damage on your behalf, you're not worried about it, but once it becomes a problem, bam, you can always get rid of the creature. And also, it doesn't exile the aura itself while you're doing it, so if you like you can reanimate it and do it over and over again too. I think this card's super fun and one of the most powerful of like the impetus and the vows in comparison, and I see it being very useful in the precon, but also very useful in like aura decks. So like Ariette of the Charmed Apple, Mazzy in particular, it's going to be absolutely fantastic, and then also like Killian too. If you build like a Killian aura deck, you can cast this for only 1 mana instead of 3, so that's super fun. So basically, like any aura deck, any like political like Goad style deck, I think Redemption Arc is going to be one of the best auras you can slam on a creature. But then we move on to my favorite card from the entire precon. It's Trouble in Pairs. This is a 4 mana white enchantment that says if an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. So this is a convoluted way of basically saying you're going to be drawing a ton of cards in your white deck, especially at like mid to higher power tables where drawing cards is like a given for every single turn, and casting a bunch of spells is also a given. So yeah, when your opponents are just playing the game of Magic, you're going to be just drawing maybe like 3 extra cards per turn cycle. It's going to be pretty bananas, and you know, shutting down extra turns, I don't know why it's there, but I'm happy. Sure, I'll take it. It seems like fluff, but it can be very relevant sometimes. So I think this card is going to be fantastic in a lot of white decks, but it's particularly strong in the style of like group hug white decks where you're kind of ensuring that your opponents are going to be drawing extra cards. Like our Borka commander is going to be ensuring that we're going to be having our opponents draw extra cards, because when they're hitting each other, and we're going to be goading them, so they're going to be forced to hit each other, you get to draw a card and they get to draw a card. Well, that's going to be their second card that turn, so that means you get to draw another card. And then when your next opponent goes to attack, you get to draw another card too. So Trouble in Pairs can really add up really easily there. Also, if you run stuff like Howling Mine effects where you make them draw extra cards every single turn, it also gets really good. It's very comparable to Smuggler's Share, but it's just like a strictly better Smuggler's Share because it, well, not strictly better because it costs 1 more mana, but it triggers off more things, so you're going to be drawing more cards off it. But I think both of them are going to be fantastic, both in this deck and also in like the Council for those style of decks where you're running Howling Mines, you're making sure your opponents are drawing extra cards, and then you're going to be drawing even more cards in response to that. So that's super fun. I run like Smuggler's Share, Howling Mine, and the Council of 4 in my Zedru deck. It's basically kind of what the Council of 4 is trying to do, but like I've just run it in the Zedru package, and I'm going to put Trouble in Pairs in the deck immediately as soon as the card is printed. All right, those are all the brand new cards exclusive to this pre-constructed deck, and now we're going to be checking out the reprints, starting with the top 4 most expensive reprints in the set. And the first one is a doozy. Fiendish Duo was printed in like Game Night something like really small set, and it was pretty popular, and it's $36 at the time of recording. Now this card is going to plummet in price. I assume it'll go down to at least like $10, but yeah, that's a really nice reprint to kick things off, and it works particularly well in this precon deck, right? If your opponents are dealing damage to each other, they're dealing double, and that's the whole point of this deck, is to get your opponents attacking each other, so this is fantastic. Then we have another great like combat trick that is like Pillow 40, and like If your opponents know about it, then it's a rattlesnake, but it's like a really good card in this deck. It's Comeuppance, where it's like a super fog, like take the bait, except instead of making your opponents attack somebody else, you just basically blow them out, like destroy all their creatures and make them deal the damage to themselves instead. Lauren of the Third Path is kind of like a commander staple, I would say. It's like a Reclamation Sage for white, except it's legendary, so it has even more synergies. And you can tap it to have each you and an opponent draw a card. And like I said before, that works really well in politics, just in general, but also it works really well with like Smuggler's Share and Take the Bait. And speaking of Smuggler's Share, look at Smuggler's Share. It was pushing $8. And so this is another great reprint and just like another great card in white. I think this card is very underrated. I think people look at it and say like, oh, it's not going to do that too much. And I think if you're at like a meta where everybody's like drawing like maybe one extra card every once in a while, you know, not every single turn, and they're only casting like one spell a turn and they're not ramping too much or whatever, then yeah, then it's not that good. But if you're at like mid to more optimized levels, then Smuggler's Share starts getting really, really good. Especially though, if you're forcing your opponents to draw cards for extra value, like this deck is doing a lot of. And now the rest of the reprints, I'm going to look at the creatures and then the spells and the artifacts and enchantments, and then finally the lands, all in different categories. And then I'm also going to always start from the mana value, from the lowest to the highest. And we're just going to kind of breeze through them just so you can see what we have here. So Wall of Omens, just like a cheap early blocker, I guess. Agitator Ant, it works with goading, so that's really nice. Boros Reckoner is kind of like a rattlesnake, and we do have like some burn spells in this, so it can kind of ping people if you're being attacked. Orzhov Advocatus is another like politics card, kind of pillow 40. It buffs your opponents, and you know, you buff your opponents and then goad them, and also you just can't be attacked, so it's a nice pillow 4 card. Stalking Leonin is a really good rattlesnake. You secretly choose an opponent, nobody knows who it is, so everybody's afraid to attack you, or else you might exile one of their creatures. Frontier Warmonger, it works really well with this goad style of play where you're giving your opponents extra incentives, buffs to attack each other. Keeper of the Court kind of catches you up if you're behind compared to like the green player in lands, or you just have less creatures than everybody else. Selfless Squire is another pillow 4 card. Instant speed, just way to fog / make a big dude in response to being attacked. Psalm Simulacrum, just nice ramp and Trump blocker. Vengeful Ancestor is one of the few cards that actually buff Goad specifically. And when goaded creatures attack, they just ping their controller a little bit. Windborn Muse, another pillow 4 card, it's fine. Anya Merciless Angel is one of the few cards in this deck that like, once the game is going on long enough and people have been beating themselves down, Anya can just come in and start finishing people off just by herself. Indestructible, huge flying beater. I love her. Then we got Brash Taunter, a great defense card, indestructible, works really well with burn spells. Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs is another pillow 4 card. Darien, King of Sheldor is kind of like a rattlesnake where like you can get hit, but in response, your opponents are going to be punished by you having a lot of creatures on the battlefield. Itali Primal Stone doesn't really fit with the rest of the deck, but it is just like nice top end, and it will generate card advantage and probably like help you actually, you know, get on the offensive yourself. Steel Hellkite is kind of bad, but it is flexible removal, I suppose. Sun Titan, always a nice classic. Angel of the Ruins, really great card here. Cycle it early or just play it late game to act as removal. Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight, is absolutely fantastic in Pillow Fort decks. It does everything this deck wants to do. It halves the amount of damage you're taking and then doubles the amount of damage your opponents are dealing to each other, and you're dealing to them too. So it's a great top end for the deck, ideal even. Then we have Ancient Stone Idol. It's fine. It's one of those, you know, like surprise Pillow 40 cards, you know. And then Elspeth Sun's Champion. Your creatures are kind of smaller than everybody else, hopefully. So you get to one-side to wrath them a little bit or put some token blockers on the battlefield. Gideon Sacrifice, it's okay. It's kind of like a fog, but like a bad fog. Deflecting Palm, super fun. You know, you're being attacked and then suddenly you just redirect all that damage to the person's face, maybe kill them. Like the Voltron player kills themselves is super funny. Or if somebody casts Wheel of Misfortune and you just cast Deflecting Palm and choose 100 for a Wheel of Misfortune and they just murder themselves. That's super funny too. Spectacular Showdown is another great finisher. I love this card. It's kind of like a fair version of Insurrection, I guess. Just give everything Goad and Double Strike, including your own stuff, by the way. So everybody just smashes in and gets the job done. Seven's Reclamation, nice recursion. Comeuppance, we already covered that one. Oopsie, it's here anyway too. Disrupt Decorum is another like Spectacular Showdown thing. Mass Goad everything. Doesn't give them Double Strike, but it's a lot cheaper, and it's not another way to kind of like close out games. Promise of Loyalty is like a political board wipe. Everybody gets to keep one creature, but those creatures can't attack you. Winds of Wrath is a kind of interesting board wipe in this deck. There's a lot of like vows and impetuses and stuff like that in this deck that you're actually going to be enchanting most of the time your opponent's creatures, but all of those creatures, all those enchanted creatures can't attack you. So it's actually in your best interest to keep those creatures on the battlefield. So Winds of Wrath is going to kill everything that basically isn't enchanted by your auras most of the time. Sol Ring, classic. Arcane Signet, classic. By the way, these aren't the official arts that are going to be in the Precon. These are just like the cheapest versions of everything, I think. So the Precon art is going to be a little bit different, just a heads up. Bloodthirsty Blade, an equipment that goes, Fellwar Stone, Mind Stone, Talisman Conviction, just good mana rocks. Thought Vessel, good mana rock. Tome of Legends, I guess this deck was struggling on card draw and they just threw in something that was kind of meh. Like your commander does want to attack, but you'll be noticing here that there's not a lot of evasion for a commander. So it's good in theory, but I don't know. Curse of Opulence, one of my favorite red cards. Actually, my favorite red card. Also very political, incentivizes everybody to attack each other. Soul Snare is a nice rattlesnake. Seal of Cleansing, another nice rattlesnake. Like you could say, hey, if you attack me, I'm going to blow up one of your things, so don't attack me. Cool? So that's a cool card. Duelist Heritage, another way of just incentivizing people to attack each other. You'll give their opponent's creatures double strike too if they don't attack you, right? Ghostly Prison, Pillow Fort card. Martial Impetus, Goads. Shiny Impetus, my favorite Impetus. Goads and generates treasures for you. The vows are here too. I feel like they're kind of power crept by the Impetus cycles and just like better version of them, but they're here. And then we have Rite of the Raging Storm, which is super fun because it gives your opponents beaters to start smashing each other with. All right, so that was the Blame Game. My thoughts on this deck is that it's really cool. I really like Goad decks. I really like political decks that are all about, incentivizing your opponents to attack different ways. And it's not stuck on just one way of forcing our opponents to attack each other. It's not just like all in on Goad, and if Goad is not happening, then we get immediately demolished by our non-goaded opponents. No, it has Pillow Fort, it has rattlesnakes, it has incentives like the curses and whatnot, or our commander drawing them cards if they hit each other. So there's a varied mix of ways to have our opponents attacking each other and dealing damage on our behalf. And I really like that. The downside here, though, is that it's so all in on giving our opponents incentives to hit each other that if you're in a meta where your opponents aren't creature heavy, like they're combo decks or they're like sacrifice decks or whatever, this deck is probably going to fall flat on its face. I really didn't see many proactive plays in this deck. I didn't see many ways of giving your opponents, creatures and stuff so they can start swinging in and you can goad some creatures or anything. So I feel like it's going to be very good in the right meta, which is like creature heavy, combat heavy metas. But if you're going to be up against combo decks or anything that doesn't really focus heavily on creatures like Spellslinger or whatever, then this is not going to be that effective. And also I thought that like the card draw options were kind of sus. Like, yeah, the commander draws cards, which is really nice. So when it's firing on all cylinders, that's great. But outside of that, I don't know, it seemed a little bit sketchy here. And like the spot removal was a little bit sketchy. So yeah, I really like the concept, but I do think the deck probably needs some tuning, so it will be better for your local game night. All right, so that was the first Precon out of the way. I'm going to be back soon with another Precon video later today. And then on Friday, I'm going to be coming out with the last two videos. That's the plan, at least. So check back to the channel soon. Like and subscribe if you like this sort of stuff. And until then, friends, see ya.